Good morning. Today is Tuesday, June 8th, and I am very excited to bring to you another Microsoft 365 Government Community Call. Special guests in the room, Alison Fehling from Microsoft and Joel Ward, the Mr. AV podcast, and Booz Allen Hamilton, and your usual suspects. Let's do a quick round robin. This is Jay Leask. I'm the Director of Strategy for Federal at AvePoint Public Sector. Alison, you want to do a quick intro?
Yes, thank you, Jay. I'm Alison Fehling. I'm the Global Mixed Reality Lead for Defense at Microsoft.
All right. And then Sarah.
Oh yeah, that's me. Hi, I'm Sarah Gilbert. I am the Community Manager for the Microsoft Tech Community Public Sector.
I'm Jeremy Wood. I'm Director of Policy and Planning at Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is a federal agency.
I'm Joel Ward. I am a Scrum Master, but also an XR subject matter expert here at Booz Allen Hamilton.
Hi, folks. I'm Rima, and I'm the lead for teams in Teams Engineering for Federal and DoD.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Alison, Joel, very excited to have you guys with us this month. As the banners that have been hopefully flooding the intranet the last week say, today's topic is on XR, mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality. Wherever you come from in that space, we've been talking about it the last couple months, and while it is not the hot topic for all government agencies right now, there is a play in this space for government, and we thought it was important to talk about it, especially as to how it relates to M365, but just in general, the fact that this is something happening. There's some big announcements that have been happening, and we wanted to make sure that that was a topic that we got to. Now, before we jump into that, we'll do a quick reminder of the show. The M365 Gov community call is a community call. So go to the PubSec Tech community, which should be linked in the chat now. Go to the PubSec Tech community, join, ask questions. What we do throughout the month is bring those questions together. We post them and share them with our special guests, and we do our best to share what the community is asking for in this call. We will do some quick news review over what's been happening for the last month, and then we'll jump into the primary topic. Speaking of news review, Sarah, what's been going on in the tech community?
So for the month of May, we have one of our blog posts up from the Jeremy Wood on his M365 for Gov DC, and it's with Humans IT. It's a interview with the Allie Thompson, who's the Humans of IT community lead. And it's how the government community can benefit from human stories. In other news, we did a security and compliance AMA in partnership with Summit 7, and that one is with Matthew Littleton and Matt Sozman. So it's like the battle of the Matts. Matthew Littleton is a compliance specialist and retired Navy captain, and Sozman is a senior security architect. So they're offering unique insights and depth of knowledge around the security product suite. It's a really great session. Please go and watch it. And then we also have one of our newest authors is Edna Conway, who published with us. She's a Vice President, Chief Security and Risk Officer of Azure at Microsoft. And she recently did a session at the Microsoft Intelligence Security Summit. And we have a blog up with an overview as well as a video of her session there.
Awesome.
I did not hear nearly enough of our names in that list of recent blogs, and I blame us entirely.
It's like, not my fault. It's you.
That's fair. So
yeah, we'll have great blogs coming up soon from Jay Leask.
Oh boy. I'll try, I promise. Okay, this month I'm going to get you an article. I don't know what on. We'll figure that out later. Speaking of this month, there's been a lot of interesting news. Jeremy and Rima, I know you guys are going to get into the Microsoft Teams updates because there's been some good stuff coming out there on the user experience side. But before we do that, in May, the executive order on security and cloud came out. Jeremy, you want to talk a little bit about what's going on and what we should expect to see over the next couple of months?
Yeah, it's a big one. I mean, it definitely is reflective of some of the latest hacks happening in the industry and some of the impacts it's had on, the public at large, and now government agencies get to show how we're compliant. And I joked before we started that it's going to suck. This month's going to suck because most agencies now have to update their cloud plans. I mean, the government for a long time has been moving to this. It was cloud first, and now it's smart cloud. Get everything in the cloud because it's less to update, less manual infrastructure to manage. But also now we're really being pushed on zero trust architecture, which is expensive. It's tough. It's going to take a lot of time to put together, but yet we have to put a plan together by July 11th. So that should be a lot of fun this month. So thank you, Rima, Sarah, for all the blog posts on zero trust lately. I've been reading them all ferociously, trying to make sure I understand it before we put together a plan. So I think you'll see a lot of agencies scrambling to meet the requirements in here, and those are the two. Those are the two that are first. And most agencies have cloud strategies already in place. It's the zero trust thing that's going to catch a lot of us off guard. So we'll see what happens.
So because of that, we've actually decided that we're going to do our best to have a July episode on zero trust in M365. If you have if you work for a government agency and you have done a lot in this and you feel like you have a plan that you want to share about, we would love to have you as a guest on next month. So reach out and let us know. If you just want us to reference you or your example, that's great. But if you actually want to be one of the middle-faced columns here, middle column faces, we'd love to have you. So Jeremy can't be our only government person on this call.
No, we need more government representation.
All right, Jeremy, Rima, what's going on with Teams this month?
Gosh, you guys have been busy, Rima.
I know, we're always busy. I don't know if anybody ever has like I always imagine us just little elves in a workshop, just hammering away. I've been to obviously our office numerous times. It's clearly not that situation, but we haven't done it. People who are working, I feel 24/7. I'll kick off with a few actually really cool things. So the first thing that happened that got released was around meeting security. So right now we're focusing on making sure that we don't have any of the well, I don't want to name another brand, but any other bombing of people coming into meetings, right? I'll just avoid it. I was going to do it, but I was going to avoid it. Yeah, so basically right now, if you join a meeting and let's say you're forwarded that invite or you're given that invite via, a copy and paste, you'll have access to the meeting chat during the meeting. But once that meeting is over, then you'll be kicked out essentially. So that's something that we really were passionate about to make sure that folks who weren't invited to the meeting are only a part of that perpetual chat. So for example, if you send a meeting invite out to, let's say all the folks on this call, so Jay, Alison, Sarah, Joel, Jeremy, right? We would be really the only folks who would have access to that meeting in perpetuity. And so we've had some customers who find that they're hey, this is a little challenging. We end up, forwarding information, just forwarding that meeting invite, not from Outlook, just literally copying and pasting the join meeting link. And that's challenging because Outlook doesn't know that you're supposed to be a part of that meeting. So whenever you create a Teams meeting, just make sure that you're inviting the right people, either through Teams or through Outlook, and that those people are supposed to be a part of that meeting, and make sure to use our tools when creating those meeting invites instead of just copying and pasting join links everywhere, because we're really tightening up security and we don't want folks who aren't supposed to be a part of your meeting joining that meeting inadvertently. So so you're going to see that in GCC. Another thing that's really cool is that we released the SharePoint pages and lists tab, that native tab, in GCC High and DoD. So that's exciting. And then also take a note to your message center folks, because I know we've got some planned kind of things coming up around private channels. So we just had a message center post in GCC High around that. So stay tuned for more stuff that's coming, hopefully before end of summer. We know that there's a really big transition right now between CVR and DoD. And so you're going to see a lot of great features hit before the end of our Q2, our calendar year Q2. And so just stay tuned for that in DoD. We're hoping folks are going to like that.
Interesting. Some other things I noticed, by the way, are some new features around things like video sharing. You can actually make it so people's videos can't be turned on, which is really good if you're going to record a session and post it for agency to reference later. I really like that. Something I think that's a little probably more useful for those of us in GCC. Breakout rooms came out a little while ago, but now they've enhanced that to allow room retention across reoccurring meetings. So if you're doing a training, say over the course of a week, you don't have to reset those breakout rooms every single time, which is very useful, I think.
That's awesome. Yeah. And we ran a virtual conference last Friday, M365 Chicago. It was not government focused, which is why I haven't been advertising it heavily on this side, but we used the Teams feature that you referred to previously, where you can keep people from turning their video on and unmuting, even in just a normal Teams meeting. So we used that to allow us to use channel meetings for our conference. So the chats were then shared with everybody and perpetual throughout the day. And then our moderators were able to allow people to turn their cameras on, their videos, their audio on when, Q&A came up or anything like that. Very valuable tool, especially in a space where you need to push information out, but then want to allow people to share with you throughout. So awesome features coming to the GCC.
Yeah. Well, one more thing I want to highlight, and I know we got to get on to our main topic. It was interesting. Teams templates showed up in my tenant last week, surprised a lot of us because they're on by default, and I might have to go shut off many of them because many of them are just not relevant to governments and the work that we do. But kudos that the team continues to get these features rolled out to us.
That rolled out. When did Teams templates roll out to commercial, Rima? Do you remember approximately?
I want to say maybe it's like 9 months ago, maybe.
Was it 9 months? Okay.
I
was going to say, it feels like it was only like 6 months ago, but then again, the pandemic was like 1 week, but it was really like still on.
Well, I should preface that I do get things like a lot earlier than other folks. So it might have been 9 months for me. Sorry. So it's hard for me. Like, it's just FYI side note. It's like so difficult for me to keep track of like 4 different clouds because we've got commercial and then the 3 government clouds.
Yeah.
And then obviously like my internal release. So if I ever say like something's been released in commercial earlier, my bad. I'm getting
Fair
old.
enough.
I can't remember things. I need to take more vitamins.
Well, Jay, do you mind if I start the next segment?
I do terribly. I'm offended that you would take that. No, please start us off.
Well, I'm so very excited about this, and I'm so happy that both Joel and Alison are here because I really wanted to have this topic. There's other communities I'm involved in with the government, and XR and augmented reality are becoming big topics in those spaces. And so let's start out. I mean, for Alison and Joel, what is XR, MR, VR, AR, all these wonderful acronyms? What are we talking about?
Still muted. Thank you for having me, by the way. It's a great question because I remember when I first took this role, I was confused at all the different terms because I kept seeing people use interchangeably AR, which stands for augmented reality, MR, which is mixed reality, and then there's VR, virtual reality. And so it helps to think about it that they're on a continuum, mixed reality continuum. And so on either end are the poles. So you have virtual reality on one end, which we all know that's been around since, I guess, early to mid 90s. And then the other end is augmented reality, which if you think about it is like Pokemon Go, or like for me, my car has heads-up display and it shows my speed limit on my windshield when I drive. So along that continuum is where we think about mixed reality. And Microsoft describes our practice as mixed reality because we do have products and solutions that fit along that continuum. But our, marquee device is the Hololens device, and we describe that as a mixed reality device because what that means is when you have the headset on the top of your head, you can still see your physical environment around you, but you can also then see the holograms, which you can interact with. These are, 3D images that you can interact with. So whereas virtual reality is a completely immersed experience. And like I said, that's been around from the mid-90s. And most people think of that, right, as your the video games, the Oculus Quest, right? So it's sometimes we have to educate people when we talk about it because a lot of people just instantly think virtual reality, and that's not always the case.
Joel, anything to add?
Well, yeah, so a lot of people call, to build on what you just said, Alison, a lot of people call it virtual reality, and like you said, there's different terms for different types. Mixed reality, or in industry, XR, which a lot of us use, but also is a little bit confusing for people who are not part of this, covers everything. I think mixed reality, which is what Microsoft uses, is a kind of good middle ground for something that could do both, right? You mentioned the HoloLens, which, as you can see back here, I have a couple devices, is a pair of glasses that has holographic over using stuff like waveguides, or there's other kinds of technology for passing information into your eye where you can still see the world. Yeah. There are also augmented or mixed reality devices that are VR devices that have pass-through cameras. And you mentioned Pokemon Go is kind of like that, but with your cell phone instead of headset. So it can be very confusing because there's just so many different ways of doing the same thing. Point is, XR, MR, AR, VR is a way of bring virtual into your reality, either totally engulfing it in VR or overlaying it in some way in AR, MR. So you can do other things without having to stare at a two-dimensional screen, which is really the whole point. Being able to interact with things more naturally. And also it starts to convince your mind that you are either somewhere else or interacting with things that are somewhere else, which is the point.
So how real is this? Like, is this something that we're only seeing in, the expensive research and development facilities, or are we seeing stuff that's more geared towards consumers right now? Like Alison, you mentioned Pokemon Go as an example. Yeah. Are we seeing real practical non-toy purposes for this in the market today?
Yes, absolutely. And Microsoft, this is our next big bet. We consider it the next wave of computing. So, behind PCs and smartphones. So we're betting big on it. And we've seen a lot of industries embrace mixed reality since we released the first HoloLens headset in 2016. So it's really not just something that's, in the movies. We see a lot of nice slick videos that we can, that Microsoft made on how people are actually using it. So it is very real now. And I think that's part of barrier to entry, so to speak, is educating people that it is actually real and that we have customers who are using it now in the field and who have experienced very big return on investment numbers. And so it's now just trying to convince people that it's not just a game, which is hard. It is hard. I get it. And Department of Defense, they are quite forward thinking in this technology. I've had a lot of small companies come to me for help who have applied to the Air Force's SBIR, Small Business Investment Research Program with AppWorks. So they've embraced mixed reality as a way to really do remote assistance work and guided workflows. Those are our two main core use cases we see for mixed reality. So it is quite real.
So I wanted to add something. So right now, for COVID, because I needed some methodology towards exercise, and I had someone, actually Anton Robbins, expose me to the Oculus. So I've been using the Oculus a lot for exercise, and through my journey through that has gotten me really kind of intrigued and passionate about the space because I see the potential. So obviously, Oculus is owned by Facebook, which, has its own kind of set of differences here, obviously, but what I'm starting to realize is that there's more and more apps around meetings and improving the meeting experience, especially when you're not physically with someone. And again, like me being in Teams, I'm like, aha, like meetings, like I want to know more about that. And I know from our colleagues, like in Teams, we have a lot of customers who are asking about that. Like, what's the future of meetings around this space? And I was just kind of interested in what your thoughts are around that, both Alison and Joel.
Yeah, so we announced back at, I guess it was Ignite in March, Microsoft Mesh, which is this fully collaborative environment that is supposed to be this place where no matter where you are in the world, you can come in with your avatar and have an interactive meeting. And that will eventually be available through Teams. It's on the roadmap. I don't have any dates yet, but that is the idea, Rima, because you're right. For most of us beyond, the frontline technician workers where mixed reality really is a great fit, it's like, well, what about the collaborative work experience, right? None of us are traveling just yet. And so why can't we start to use this for these meetings? And so that's exactly the purpose behind Mesh. We do have a mixed reality partner now called Spatial. They're wonderful. They're based in New York. They have a great app that works right now on Teams. So you're going to see a lot more companies getting into this space.
Yeah, and there are quite a few in the past year. Speaking to the situation we've been in for over a year now, there were quite a few before that, and there naturally was a peaked interest since we all kind of ended up being at home for a while. I was actually digging into this a year ago, and when this happened, it was interesting to see how some places really kind of dove into it. There were some conferences, for example, that right after COVID started, they actually did go fully VR in things like AltSpace or Engage or some of those other platforms. And people have been experimenting with that over the past year, and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. What's interesting is kind of seeing who's done what and what kind of feedback they've gotten. But it's been interesting to see how that's worked. I'm curious to see as we go back into normality, how much of that we keep versus how much we just give up. Or what I'd love to see, speaking of mixed reality and the kind of future of how all this works, is that in between, which is what I see with stuff like Mesh, that is supposed to bring people that are on this 2D screen we're on now, as well as a HoloLens, as well as a VR headset, as well as who knows what else comes next, together, no matter what platform you're on. And you mentioned Spatial, and I know the guys at Spatial, and we were looking at Spatial too. They are showing how that's possible, where you can use Spatial in HoloLens, you can Spatial in Oculus Quest, you can use Spatial on your cell phone, you can use Spatial in a web browser with no install whatsoever. That is how it really needs to be for people to be. And by the way, the web browser based version of that is XR, right? XR is not just headset. You don't have to put on one of these pairs of glasses behind me. You can actually use your computer. And the best situation is you don't have to install anything. You can use a browser. There's WebXR that just uses a standard web browser, and you can interact in a three-dimensional space. And so as long as that low barrier of entry for folks, at least to get into it, that will help a lot in the adoption and understanding of how to use really the idea of a three-dimensional space wherever you are.
100%.
So out of curiosity, what kinds of barriers are there for XR to being more consumer friendly, more in the hands of everybody that we're talking to, that's listening right now? Like, what are we seeing as holding us back from being able to get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Joel started to touch on it. And, eventually our vision, and Alex Pittman is our technical fellow who basically is the father of HoloLens, created it. I think the ultimate vision is that it will mixed reality, some sort of headset device, whether they look more like glasses. That's the intent, is that eventually it will be for commercial use. It's not there yet. The HoloLens is really for enterprise use. They're rather expensive. They're $3,500 a piece. They're kind of delicate. They're really easy to use, but you're not going to have just someone at home like put on their headset and get into a meeting. Not yet. So I think there are a lot of form factors, and a lot of different companies are coming into this space and creating devices that fit that need. I know is it the Quest one? I think they had another one. Yeah. I heard a lot of people say it's pretty fantastic, and the price point is great. So it's just trying to figure out what form factor works best for which use case and which industry. And it's great to see more people get into this because it pushes the technology where it needs to go.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying you're trying to overcome some of those barriers, because I think what people consider when you're talking about mixed reality or VR is they're immediately thinking of what's in entertainment right now. So they're thinking of Ready Player One, or, for the older generation, they're thinking of Tron. So
wow,
you have to set their expectations a little bit. Jeff Bridges isn't just going to pop out and show you how to use it. Or like I said, they see Ready Player One and they think they have to have all of this equipment just to be able to set it up, and that's not.
I get it. Yeah, and it is. like any paradigm shift, it's a bit scary, and it's going to take a while for people to embrace it. We've seen a lot of industries embrace it, but for widespread commercial use, I think we're still a couple years out, right? But that's
interesting. So I mean, I know you're doing work within the government sector, and I'm familiar with the HoloLens capabilities from like a frontline worker, somebody who's doing maintenance on a piece of equipment and has that reach back to an expert, or even somebody back in the office saying, yeah, right there. And I've seen the demos of that. It's really, really impressive. How is that represented within the government space?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, like I was saying before, they've actually been fairly progressive about embracing this technology, but it is definitely hard in the DoD space. All of us know that there are a lot of special requirements, operating requirements in the DoD, and the HoloLens, for instance, is basically a self-contained computer. It is designed to be untethered and connected to Wi-Fi, and that is a very difficult scenario for the government customers. They need to be disconnected, right? And so then once you get into tethering it again and then disabling the Wi-Fi, it neuters the device, right, a bit. But certainly where there's a will, there's a way. So we've had a lot of government customers figure out, okay, how can they use it in their environment? So for instance, we have Lockheed Martin does work with NASA. They help work on the crewed space capsule, I won't say that, but called the Orion. And what they use mixed reality for is a lot of the assembly work. It's crucial that when you line up certain parts to be, turned and fastened, you need obviously high accuracy for those. And so mixed reality has enabled them to reduce their errors and then lower the cost. So it's like 30 to 50% decrease in overall technician time, 99% decrease time to information, and then 85% decrease in overall training time. So those are huge return on investment numbers that they have seen. Now, what it took for them behind the scenes to get that to work was tremendous, and it's ongoing. So we have the challenge is, how do our defense customers and then like the defense industrial base, like Northrop Grumman and Raytheon, they're all interested in mixed reality, but it's how do you get a classified workload onto the HoloLens, and it's very difficult.
That would be. I worked in. I started my career in DoD, and I could see how that would be difficult. Although it'd be interesting, the Air Force would have potentially some application if they wanted to leverage it for, say, aircraft maintenance or any of the services. Really, most of them have some level of equipment maintenance.
100%, and they all do across all of the commands, right? And I work with a lot of, we call them ISVs, independent software vendors. Tremendous amount of ingenuity on some of these ISVs that come to me and say, we're developing either training platform on the HoloLens, which is used to augment classroom time, right, for training for some of these mechanics, and then help augment them when they're actually in the field doing this work, because it's a lot of money if they accidentally break a part, right? Take that piece of equipment offline. So I would say right now we have a ton of interest. It's basically a lot of proof of concept. So they're like simultaneously trying to prove the value of the technology, which is there, but then also like how to bring their security teams along the way. So it's a bit hard. We don't see a wide scale deployment of the HoloLens across the DoD because of all the things I just mentioned. We're working on it, but.
Well, eventually you'll get the hardened version, right? We had hardened computers for DoD. Now we get a hardened headset.
Yeah.
Well,
there are some ways to do it. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, so the Army is doing work with Microsoft on the IVAS program, and that's what we're very curious to see what the outcome of that is, right? That's very specific.
Yeah.
I know that you probably can't talk too much about it, but from the public information that's been made available, it's very interesting to see what Army is doing alongside Microsoft in building a sort of a separate version of the HoloLens, which may help us. And so that's very specific to Army and DoD.
Right.
but all of that will help move MR, AR forward. And so that's what's kind of exciting right now is seeing opportunities like that to move everything forward, even if it's for a very specific need right now. And it's been exciting to see what they've been showing and what's been coming out, and what that may affect later. And what I want to mention, by the way, is the flip side of sort of the operational stuff you're talking about. I think both MR and VR side, the virtual reality side, can also help with that on the training before you go out in the field. And this actually has been happening for decades. I think a lot of the quote unquote virtual reality came out of places like DoD, with not necessarily headsets, but with giant rooms. They call it virtual reality, but it's really just more a giant room with big screens in it, where they would do training before going out in a plane, before going out doing combat training or something like that. You can now do with a headset, and actually it's much higher fidelity and can be much more realistic. And then you think about then combining that with augmented reality. So you have some people in VR, some people in AR. You do a whole training scenario, no matter where you are, can also open up the opportunity to train. It doesn't replace real training, like actual physical training, but if you can do it more often, and it sort of tricks your mind into feeling like you're doing it, you get that muscle memory, even though you know it's not entirely true. For when you go out for real life, then it actually feels like you've done it before. And so that's been really powerful. And that's actually been happening for a while. And just the technology in the past 5 years, 2016, since a lot of the commercial headsets came out, including the HoloLens and the Vive and the Oculus Rift, have all helped move that forward, not just on the gaming side, but on the enterprise side and even on the government side, pushing it forward to move it out of the old days.
So,
go ahead, Jay.
I was going to ask. So you mentioned training a lot. I liked the examples that you talked about, where it's very expensive to take down a system to train on it, or it may be even worse, life-threatening if you have to take something down before you've actually played with it, right? And then being the best training is actually touching something, and where you can actually start doing it virtually. You can start messing with the components and seeing what it would be like before you do that potentially life-threatening or very expensive motion. How far are we from being able to see XR-based training in a formal, LMS type application, where maybe you're in the LMS, you see that this is my training program, you click on it, and if it's something that's more augmented reality, you can bring it right up on your phone and see what it looks like, or if it's more formal and needs the the whole headgear, it may be a little bit different. But do you guys see that being part of an LMS type application for commercial or government, frankly?
Yes. Yes, it's not happening already. I don't know if you know of anything in particular, Alison.
So like I said, we have a lot of ISVs who are working on that now. They have some prototypes that they're doing that have been very well received in the Air Force, because so let me back up. So in the beginning, a lot of people were using VR for training, and I'm talking about actually like pilot training. But I think the military recognized that while VR has had some good applications, it's not exactly realistic, because you're completely immersed in a virtual environment, right? Like the pilots have no way to interact with anything real in their environment. So they are seeing how mixed reality can bring that training to a different level. But there have been some limitations of just the technology in general. So, when you're wearing a device, the person actually can't be moving, because the holograms have no way then to anchor themselves in the real world. So that's the limitation of technology. That can be overcome. We're certainly seeing some of that's getting there. But as far as, training being in like an LMS system or a regular part of a curriculum, absolutely. Because what learning in 3D does, and it's been proven, is that people can understand and retain that information much better than they can in 2D, right? Just like think about the PowerPoint presentations or reading instruction manuals, right? Those do a very good job of having someone understand what they're learning. But when you have a hologram that's in your environment that you can walk around 360 and actually interact with it, and have guided work instructions that have 3D annotations pointing to right here is where you turn this wrench, and then actually then get feedback to how you did on that one particular exercise, it will revolutionize training. It won't take place in classroom. Sorry, go ahead. But
well, I was going to say, it's much more engaging. And so whether it's augmented reality, mixed reality, or virtual reality, all of that can make you help you focus on it better than, and we've all been there having to do required training. Every time I start a new project, I have to do the same required security training, and I've seen it a million times. But if I was able to interact with it, I think it would help me focus on it better, even if I've done it before, because it's actually giving me something to do. And I'll say on the virtual reality side, by sort of the definition of how the thing works, if you put a pair of goggles on your headset and that's all you see, you can't be distracted by cell phones or direct messages, right? And even though some of the platforms are bringing in some of that into the virtual experience, it allows you to focus on what you're doing much better than I literally have 3 screens in front of me right now, by the way, right? And so I'm focusing on this chat right now, but I could be doing something else. VR, AR, MR can help you focus on that and make you want to interact with it because you, well, partly because you have to, but also because it's really drawing you into it.
What's that mean for something like accessibility? So government cares a lot about accessibility. Did I steal your thunder, Jay?
No, I was waiting for Rima to ask her question.
Oh, that's right.
No, it's okay. Go. That was a good question, Jeremy. Go.
I mean, technology like this, like a lot of technology, gives us new capabilities to overcome challenges that people have. How might this work out with this sort of technology?
Well, so it is definitely something that is top of mind for many of us. Like with all new technologies, like the internet before us, and even architecture technology, it's was not necessarily top of mind when this was coming up. So it's obviously important because if the technology is not made accessible off the bat and the hardware is not made accessible off the bat, people won't be able to interact with it. So that goes back to, well, there are different ways of interacting. Can we come in a web browser, as long as that's accessible, versus the headset, which someone else might prefer? But does it have the kinds of accessibility options that other electronic platforms have? That's not something that's baked in naturally, as we know. That has to be, ideally is put there from the beginning, otherwise it's a retrofitting. It's definitely a concern. What I'll say on the flip side of it is, one, we have to get it accessible, but two, it can help with accessibility because you can incorporate people from wherever they are, which is sort of an accessibility feature in and of itself. If you can't travel, or if you don't want to go in the office, or you have a team that is dispersed with different abilities all over the place, you could create a virtual space in XR that incorporates all of them, and sort of treat it like a physical space. Like we have the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act here in the US, which require certain accommodations for buildings. You kind of think of XR in the same kind of way, where you can have this sort of all-inclusive space and a sort of infinite space to be able to do the kinds of things that we do all the time. And I think it could be really powerful, right? But again, the first step is it has to be accessible in the first place. Otherwise, that's all moot. And that's something that there's a bunch of us focusing on in the industry.
I wanted to, accessibility is always an interesting topic to me, and me being, I guess, like a double header of like a minority female. Like I'm always interested in understanding like inclusion too. And what I've found really interesting about this technology is that people can meet and have the room to meet virtually, where maybe they wouldn't have been able to meet in person before. So for example, one of my colleagues, Audrey Gordon, she's part of Teams, and she also used to be part of the Power Apps team. She's really big in the VR space in terms of like building her own worlds. And she found out, that I was on Oculus, so we've met a lot on Oculus, and she built her own, virtual apartment, and then we've actually sat down at her virtual kitchen table and had a conversation. And she lives in Seattle, and obviously, I live in the DC area, and we got to start talking, and she's, hey, I want to take you to another virtual world. I'm like, what are you talking about? So one of her friends, who is a female Black artist, like an actual like physical artist, puts her digital artwork in a virtual art room or virtual art gallery where people can actually go look, visit, and purchase her artwork. And for her, this was, Audrey kind of telling me the artist story was around, hey, listen, during COVID, no one's going to walk into an art gallery, but also it's hard for folks to afford even to be able to get the space for an art gallery. So why not just create a virtual one? And she's been able to, get some supplemental income around that, which has been so cool. And she's been able to actually gather a lot of other minority artists around her into a space. And I thought that was really, really cool. And I've tried to myself, like, to go out, kind of seek that same thing as well, to kind of say, hey, like, are there people from my same background and can we talk? And I've seen it to be a really welcoming community. So I love the fact that it's more than just gaming. It's about connecting people and about finding people that are maybe, your same interests, or maybe that you would not have met otherwise, and give access to those people who might not have had that opportunity before, but now have it through this space. So
I love that.
Me of like MySpace, what they did, like it was a way for musicians to kind of get their content out there, without having to go through the usual like process of getting signed to somebody for once they could actually put their music just out to the masses like that. So I wonder if that's going to build more of those communities with more of that access that, some in the minority wouldn't usually get.
So do we see HoloLens kind of taking that trajectory too? Or because I know Alison, Joel, you all have talked a lot about it being really kind of focused on the enterprise space. So what do you see with the personal space? Like, do we see kind of like costs coming down for HoloLens at all? So like it is I know we talked a little bit about barrier to entry earlier, but what are the plans in terms of what you've heard regarding the device itself in terms of future versions, but also how it might be more accessible to other folks outside?
That's a great question. The HoloLens 2 is actually cheaper than HoloLens 1. So I think the intent always is, can we make future versions, more inexpensive? But then there's always a balance of what the technology is and like actually making them things smaller, right? But I think you're right. I think if Microsoft is to consider mixed reality in the camera space, then I think, yes, the device will have to get smaller and it'll probably have to get cheaper. But like I said before, there's so many other companies getting in this space. And there's room for all these different devices depending on the industry. So, with like healthcare and even like manufacturing, like we came up with an industrial SKU for the HoloLens because there are clean room requirements that are needed. There's certain like safety standards that are needed. And so, and those are expensive certifications to go after. And there's certain, just limitations to the form factor once you've already created the device. So I think I can see there being different headsets for different industries, because it makes sense. Like, once we've already done the HoloLens 2, it's made, the form factor is what it is. Then we would have to do all these modifications to make it useful in healthcare or, like I said, manufacturing. And so, yeah, I can see definitely a lot more competition in this space if we want it for commercial. It's just gonna have to be smaller and cheaper.
It's funny, by the way, that you mentioned the clean room space, because there is a government customer that we've sort of alluded to before in the call, and that they had several HoloLens that they actually hardened to their specifications, right? And it went up in a a SpaceX kind of capsule to a certain space. And they were helping kind of their folks up there through repairs. Because it was, they couldn't send an engineer up there, so they were talking kind of to folks on the ground and helping them communicate with that, and having that clean, I forgot what the certification you called it was, but having that, I remember them saying that was really important to them. I'm like, wow, like what other device has that? I feel like no other device has that. Right. So, so my question, by the way, was not to knock anything of Microsoft, obviously.
No, not at all.
But I'm excited for it. I want to get one, actually, to be honest. I feel like
$500. My wife won't let me buy one, but I'm desperate to have one.
I know. They're not cheap, but it's Yeah, it's just we're seeing a lot of like co-opetition, right? And like really great companies come into the space, and that's good because anytime you have competition, it drives that innovation, and it needs to happen. But what's interesting being in this role is that I get the chance to see the different decisions that are considered by senior leadership when we're thinking about future tech trees, right, of this technology, because it's like, okay, well, once we commit to something and it's already on a production line, it's very difficult then to go back and modify that device. We can get certifications after the fact, but it takes time and a lot of money, and we have to have a field signal that justifies that, right? And so one device can't be one size fits all for everything. So I think we're just going to see lots of different players in there.
I have to say, as you can see, I have a few.
Yeah.
And my favorite is the HoloLens, and I got to use it, the original one that came out 5 years ago, and then obviously the HoloLens 2 that came out almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And from the total experience, by the way, one of the questions earlier was, it's not just the device, it's also the experience. And there's a lot of headsets out there where the experience is sorely lacking. As good as the hardware is, as good as the optics are, if you can't put it on and have somebody just like jump through a couple steps to start it, it doesn't matter how good the headset is. I think Microsoft does a good job. I have to say Oculus does a great job as well.
Yeah.
You pop it on and it steps you through how to set it up. And Oculus is obviously focused on the consumer market, and that just has to work. But so do the enterprise ones. And there's a lot of stuff in between. And I think right now on the consumer side, it is the Oculus. I mean, there's really no other option for VR. Yeah, it's kind of even bridging over into AR, MR, because it does have pass-through augmented reality. On the higher end are things like the HoloLens. And there's a whole bunch in between that are trying to figure out, well, where can we go? We consumer, enterprise, Magic Leap, and Real,
right.
Even Vuzix. There's all kinds of different layers of what they can do and the markets they're focused on. There is no one, I would say, that is great for everybody yet. And maybe that'll never happen. But everybody's pushing forward with the technology and also the size, right? They need to become glasses for augmented reality, mixed reality, and even the virtual reality ones. They need to get smaller and just easier to wear, and then eventually, and the cost will come down, and then we'll see it explode. So we have some time now to prepare for that on the software side, on the application side, which is another thing. We obviously need applications that are useful, and then on the accessibility side, before everybody buys one and they realize it's not going to work for them, let's get this ready for when it does actually explode.
So at the risk of A, stealing Rima's thunder, and B, kind of killing conversation in the goal of moving us through the last remaining questions that we had, when it comes to the government space, the people who are primarily listening to this conversation, where do we see this supporting government in the near future? And to kind of work Rima's question in and potentially butcher it into place, Joel, I've seen you have 4 monitors, not just 3, by using your augmented reality glasses. Do we see a collaboration direction coming? Do we see more focused on the training stuff we've talked about? Like, where do you guys see this space going for government in the next few years?
Let me start with, I think collaboration might be the sweet spot on it, to be honest, with a lot of wider use of it. Training and the stuff that we're doing now is very specialized, but not everybody's going to be stepping through, and even training, it's probably overkill for, at least for now, for everybody to put a headset on just to do security training, even though I'd love that. The collaboration stuff, though, is really, I think, where we're going to, like with Microsoft doing mesh and spatial, and even what Oculus and Facebook are doing with the productivity side of these devices, as either a replacement for your monitor or maybe augmenting your monitor or what you're doing on a desktop, and then being able to bring in virtual people, right? So just imagine we're all at home now, and we're using stuff like Teams and Slack and whatever else to chat with each other. But what if you're wearing something like a HoloLens ultimately, and Jay, actually this can happen, right? With spatial, Jay can just kind of walk in my office here at home, and we can have a natural conversation, look at each other, and they can walk away. I see that happening, and I see stuff like mesh. I feel like that's the point of stuff like mesh, where you can just not just have a planned meeting, but have more of a casual encounter like you would have at the office, in a more natural way once we can figure out how to get all the logistics working.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think collaboration is definitely the sweet spot. I spent a long time in the government, and I'm just thinking about my desk and the way I used to do work. And I think it's going to be a long time before we see a piece of equipment like that at everyone's desk. But I can see, like when we used to have video teleconferences, like we would go into a SCIF, and that's where we'd have our conferences with different stations around the world. That I can see. I can see certainly having special SCIFs where it's a mixed reality collaborative environment, right? And then you can be talking with someone in, Tokyo Station or a forward operating base in whatever war zone. That I can see happening for sure. And Joel, you even mentioned it before. It's about like the operational planning, and we do have some mixed reality partners who have developed tactical sandboxes for just that reason. It's operational planning. How can we prep every single land, sea, and air component that's going into a mission before it happens, and accounting for all the different contingencies, right? We see that now, but the number one factor right now, and even for the future, is connectivity, and it's always about connectivity. And so it's like, how can we bring this technology to edge computing?
Yep.
And yes, we have some partners that have solutions that can work on Azure Stack Edge, right? But for a forward operating base, how would we get all of that to connect? What sort of bandwidth would we need? That's the hardest part.
Yeah,
right?
I could very much see virtual space rooms, much like we saw, I remember when I was at Booz Allen, Joel, when we first rolled out the hotspots in the conference rooms with the teams rooms capabilities. Like, I could see the virtual space room where you go in and you have your virtual space meeting much more quickly than everyone looking under their chair and seeing the free Oprah provided HoloLens that surely is there. So really, really exciting.
But you're right, though, that when I think about some of the applications I used when I was in the government, like it's called Analyst Notebook, and it was a 2D way to, I worked in counterterrorism, so it was a way to map out, okay, we've got a bad actor here with different cell phone numbers using, with different emails, who was he talking to, and it would just be this spider web to the application. Imagine connecting the dots, right, actually in 3D. How much more powerful that can be, and how much faster it can be.
Yeah.
Right? It's not good. But we're a ways off from that. But people see that certainly as a potential. We'll get there, but it's going to be a while.
So, in the interest of time, first of all, this has been amazing.
Really
I like 20 minutes into the conversation, I'm like, God, it's got to have been 45 minutes. And I'm like, oh, we still have time.
I know.
It's been a really excellent conversation. Alison, Joel, really thank you for joining us and providing the experiences that you have and really helping make this an amazing conversation. Before you guys depart, do you have any particular favorite resources that you think people should go look at if they're interested, in bringing this to their agency, to their teams, whatever? What would you recommend that they go look at?
Sure, and I promised that I was going to provide you with that list. So what I will send is where can you go and actually find one? Where are the different versions? And because this is an M365 call, I have been remiss to mention that we do have 2 out-of-the-box applications on mixed reality that are available in GCC and GCC High. So there are dynamics mixed reality applications. One is Remote Assist, and that's available in GCC and GCC High. And then there's Guides, which is just a guided workflow. It's self-explanatory. That is available only on GCC right now. And we don't have that on the GCC High roadmap right now. It takes a lot of field signal to get engineering to take that on. So if there are people who are interested in saying, hey, we would really love this in GCC High, let me know. We can help with engineering. But I will send you a list of resources, a lot of good security, technical documentation, and then just general, like, I'm a VR enthusiast. Like, what are the different engines? We use Unreal, right? We use Unity. So I'd be happy to send those.
That's awesome. Joel, what are your favorite resources for people who are not as nerdy at this stuff as you are?
Shameless plug, I should mention, follow me on Twitter if you want to join me and Jay with our new mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality podcast, Mr. AV. We'll actually be talking about some of these things. And actually, if you do follow me on Twitter, my main Twitter mainly is sharing information about this. There's a lot of great blogs, by the way, and I list a lot of those on Twitter. The second thing I'll mention, if you're interested in this, especially for government, we talk about accessibility, check out xraccess.org. It's a good resource for accessibility in XR and also just connecting with people doing XR across industry, across government, across academia. And we actually have a symposium this week. If you're free on Thursday, it's free online to learn about accessibility in XR, but also it's a great way to connect in with the community that's doing XR. So I started those two things. There's a lot more. Alison mentioned, like, there's a lot of resources. Microsoft obviously has great stuff on their website as well. It can be overwhelming, so I'll just list those two.
Yeah.
And join us. And, again, reach out to me or if you have any questions, I can point you in the right direction.
I feel a blog post request coming from Sarah very soon.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's already here. It's already. Will be writing.
That's awesome. Awesome. Joel, Alison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Joel, I'm going to take that the XR Symposium announcement as a opportunity to roll into the next subject, which is our community events for our government listeners in the next month. Just a few things to mention. There's the DC Power Platform. They've got an event on CRM SalesBot. Now, I recognize that is not necessarily a government-focused topic, but I wanted to make sure we covered the DC Power Platform because it is a local area user group that is, and they do often cover government topics. So make sure you check out their website and see what's on their upcoming schedule. Joel mentioned on June 10th, the 2021 XR Access Symposium. So make sure you check that out. June 10th also, the Nova 365 user groups, Pragmatic Governance for Microsoft Teams with Michael Pesarak. That is nova365.ms. June 15th, is that yours, Jeremy? Or
no, that's Nick's.
Oh, that's right. So June 15th, the M365 Gov meetup has a records management and driving compliance conversation. And then June 21st is yours, the Microsoft 365 for government, which is doing a compliance one also. Is that right?
Compliance and cybersecurity. Yes.
There we go. All right. And then next month, as we mentioned, we've committed to it now. It's been recorded and announced. We're going to do a Zero Trust with M365 episode next month. So bring all of your friends and let's have a Zero Trust party.
That's a good topic.
And anybody have anything else they want to throw out there? No?
No, this is great.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we messed too much up this time.
Awesome conversation.
I don't think we have any floating heads today.
No
I'm
floating
kind of disappointed.
Mm-mm.
All right. Well,
Thanks,
listen,
guys, so much.
it's our pleasure. It's my pleasure entirely. I can't speak for Sarah. Renee.
It was my pleasure.
It was fantastic.
It's
Very
also
good
my
night.
pleasure too, and I can answer for Jeremy since we're hashtag SarahMe. So yes.
That's
I
right.
remember you mentioned that.
Awesome.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Have a
Have a
good
great
week.
week. And we'll see
Yeah.
you next
Thanks,
month.
everybody.
Thank you, guys. Bye.